Good morning, and greetings from The Way, the Church of Christ in Payson, Arizona. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me for today's virtual sermon. Now, before we get started, I want to say a big happy Mother's Day to all the mothers who are watching, including my own, at least hopefully anyway. It's a strange sort of Mother's Day this year. It's pretty hard to take your mom out to lunch or brunch when all the restaurants are closed, and for a lot of us, that's the main way we celebrate. But however you do celebrate Mother's Day this year, I hope that each of you will take the time to make sure that your mother knows just how much you love and appreciate her. Now today we want to start by looking at one of Jesus' better known parables, where he contrasts the life of someone who lives by his teachings with the life of someone who doesn't live by his teachings. We're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus is basically wrapping up the Sermon on the Mount by saying this: "Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." It seems like a simple idea. If your life is built on Jesus' foundation and ordered around God-centered principles, you will be able to withstand great trials. But if your life doesn't have these firm foundations, it can, and it probably will, fall apart under the severe strain of troubles. So the question is, when it comes to building our lives, where should we place our confidence? Who do you trust? When I ask, who do you trust, I'm not talking about things like whether you trust your friend not to lie to you, or whether you trust your grocery store to sell you fresh fruit as opposed to old, nasty stuff, or something like that. These are issues of situational trust, and they're a basic part of most of our lives. Most of us choose to put a certain amount of trust in people because we have to, because it's convenient to. What I'm talking about, though, is a different kind of trust. So when I ask, who do you trust, I'm asking you, who or what do you put your faith in to build your life around? Where is your trust centered? For a lot of people these days, the answer is simple: trust no one. This is the slogan of the X-Files TV show from back in the 90s, and the idea has a lot of traction today. It can be hard to know who to trust when we're living in such a self-centered culture, and so sometimes the easiest answer is don't trust anybody. Over in Micah chapter 7, the prophet describes the paranoia that comes with living in a land where all of the people that used to be faithful to God are gone, so that no one righteous remains. He says, "All men lie in wait to shed blood. Each hunts his brother with a net. Both hands are skilled in doing evil. The ruler demands gifts. The judge accepts bribes. The powerful dictate what they desire. They all conspire together. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright worse than a thorn hedge. Do not trust a neighbor. Put no confidence in a friend. Even with the woman who lies in your embrace, be careful of your words." When you're living in a society like that, it's easy to start thinking that the only smart move is to trust no one. And this kind of thinking almost inevitably leads to something else, which is the proliferation of one particular thing: conspiracy theories. When you don't know who you can trust, and when you see enemies and dangers all around you, it's not hard to feel like there must be some sort of a deeper process at work against you. See, as humans, we all want to have a sense of order about the universe. We want and we expect that there's a reason for why things happen to us. So when the world doesn't seem to give us this, when we can't match up how we think the world should look with how it actually looks, one of the solutions we come up with is to create a narrative to explain those discrepancies. And a lot of people do this by taking little facts, true facts, from here and there, and then combining them together into a single big idea that's not true, but that does explain, for them at least, why their world isn't the way it should be. And voila, pretty soon you've got yourself a genuine conspiracy theory. And it may seem like conspiracy theories are a relatively new thing, but in fact, they've been around for pretty much as long as the human race has. In fact, you could argue that the idolatry that's so central to many pagan cultures throughout history is really just a form of conspiracy theory. People saw that they weren't getting enough rain, or that their crops weren't growing, or that they weren't having enough children, and they went looking for reasons why these things happened. And when they couldn't figure it out on their own, they invented imaginary gods, the ultimate conspiracy theory, if you will, to explain why both good and bad things happen to them. And as an added bonus, they decided that they could use worship and ritual as a way of coercing the gods to do what they wanted, which is really just a way to create a sense of control in a chaotic world. So they imagined up gods who controlled the sun, the rain, the harvest, fertility, pretty much anything else that was important to them. And they also decided that the gods must be capricious and fickle, because that would explain why things didn't always work out the way they expected. I mean, after all, if you perform the worship and offer the sacrifice and do the ritual, and you still don't get rain, you've got to have some kind of an explanation for it, right? Now, this kind of conspiracy thinking, this blatant idolatry, that's largely disappeared today, or at least it has in Western society. But what we have seen is an apparent explosion of conspiracy theories in recent years. But if you actually look at it, this probably has more to do with how we transmit information today versus not that long ago than it does with anything else. In particular, in the past 25 or 30 years, the increasingly widespread use of email and the internet for communication has made it possible to share all sorts of ideas, including conspiracy theories, with large numbers of people all at one time. But is this a good thing? Well, Solomon has a few things to say about the value of bad ideas being passed on from one person to the next. Over in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, he says this: "Words from a wise man's mouth are gracious, but a fool is consumed by his own lips. At the beginning his words are folly, at the end they are wicked madness, and the fool multiplies words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell him what will happen after?" The fact is that most conspiracy theories are invented by men, and at their core, they are false, or at best, they are misleading. And they can often create real dangers for people who trust in those theories. Just think of some of the crazy and stupid ideas that have been making the rounds by email or on the internet when it comes to the coronavirus. I mean, seriously, drinking bleach to kill a virus? Or telling people that their doctors are lying to them and that wearing face masks actually increases the risk of transmitting the virus. These are reckless things to do, and they are truly examples of fools multiplying words. And it's foolish for us to listen to them. The Apostle Paul told Timothy to avoid this sort of useless thinking in no uncertain terms over in 2 Timothy chapter 2. Paul says, "Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels." Is a waste of energy, and it's a potential risk to our safety to spend our time focusing on conspiracy theories. In fact, God has spoken very definitively on this issue through the prophet Isaiah. Over in Isaiah chapter 8, he says, "The Lord spoke to me with his strong hand upon me, warning me not to follow the way of this people. Do not call conspiracy everything that these people call conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it." God tells Isaiah that he is not to buy into the multitude of conspiracy theories that are proliferating in Judah. Rather, Isaiah is to focus and remain focused on God. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. With all that said, there is one particular conspiracy theory that God does endorse, and that is the conspiracy of men who seek to rebel against God's authority. The psalmist in Psalm 2 says, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of earth take their stand and the rulers gather together against the Lord and against his anointed one. Let us break their chains, they say, and throw off their fetters. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy hill." The scriptures show us over and over again examples of people who have tried to rebel against God futilely, but they tried to set themselves up in God's place. It started back with Adam and Eve, who ate from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in order to be like God. And then we see it again at Babel, where mankind gathered together to build a tower to reach into the heavens to build himself up. And that pagan idolatry that we already looked at, ultimately that's the same sort of rebellion. It's an attempt to replace the one true God with a bunch of little false gods who can be controlled through ritual. The Bible tells us that we are not to worship such false gods, nor give them honor, and we are certainly not supposed to be placing our trust in them. So the question remains, where should we put our trust? Well, more and more people today seem to want to put their faith in the government and in our politicians. Now, it's not that we all agree that more government is a good thing, and we certainly don't agree about which politicians we should trust. On a national level, the main split right now is between those who trust President Trump. Ironically, they trust him in large part because he claims to be opposed to a lot of the things the government does, and those who trust Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders or others that are on the left politically. Our country is deeply divided along partisan and ideological lines, and as a result, a lot of people seem to feel the need to identify strongly and very loudly with whichever politician best represents their most cherished ideas. In the minds of their supporters, these politicians can do no wrong, or at least no wrong that can't be explained away or justified based on all the other good things that they're doing for the cause. As a result of the trust they've placed in their politicians, these supporters often find themselves having to compromise their own ideals just to have the politicians serve some of their other ideals. And that's a difficult place to be in. So what does the Bible say about placing our trust in politicians and governments? Well, as you might expect, it's not exactly a favorable judgment. Psalm 146, the psalmist says, "Do not put your trust in princes, in mortal men who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. Blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord his God, the maker of heaven and earth." See, the psalmist points out the folly of placing our trust in governments or politicians. Politicians are only human beings, and they're going to die just like every one of us is going to. And when they do die, or even before that, when somebody else with different ideas gets elected in their place, all of their fine ideas and the governments that they created to carry out those ideas, they tend to just fade away. So if we shouldn't place our trust in our government or in our politicians, who should we trust? Well, with the coronavirus front and center right now, a lot of people want to place their trust in science and medicine. And I get that. In Western societies, we've largely bought into two ideas, twin ideas, that science can answer every question about our world, and that medicine can provide a remedy for every health problem we might have. So when we see somebody like Dr. Fauci on TV, and he's calmly and reasonably explaining what the coronavirus is and what we need to do about it, it's easy to put our trust in him and other people like him. It's definitely easier than putting our trust in, I don't know, say the loudmouth, self-promoting ex-reality TV star who's standing next to and frequently contradicting Dr. Fauci and other scientists because he says he has a natural instinct for science. But I digress, and such contrasts aside, should we really put our trust in these doctors and scientists? Now, to be clear, I'm not asking whether we can trust them to do their jobs and get us good information. Because for the most part, you can trust a doctor to be a good doctor. You can trust a scientist to be a good scientist. They're going to follow the principles and rules of their professions, and generally, they're going to give you honest answers that represent what they know, and they're going to do the best that they can to help you. Not only that, but I would argue that science itself actually comes from God because he instilled in humans an insatiable curiosity about the world around us. And he gave us minds that allow us to use observation and reason to learn. And this is the foundation of science. And in the same way, medicine also comes from God because he built into us an instinct for self-preservation as well as hearts that are compassionate. And both of these things lead us to look for ways to save, to prolong, and to improve our lives. And that's the foundation of medicine. But the truth is that science is a very long way from knowing everything about the world, and medicine still struggles to beat back the common cold, not to mention a host of other health problems. See, science and medicine are limited in their ability to change the human condition for the same reason that government is similarly limited. And it's because they're created and run by human beings, and we human beings, we are so limited. So while I believe that we can trust doctors and scientists like Dr. Fauci to work hard and give us honest answers, the scriptures tell us that our ultimate trust should not be placed in their hands. Over in Job 8, Job says, "Such is the destiny of all who forget God. So perishes the hope of the godless. What they trust in is fragile. What they rely on is a spider's web. They lean on the web, but it gives way. They cling to it, but it does not hold." So with medicine and science out of the way, the question remains, where should we place our trust? These days, with everyone isolating, we're certainly placing more and more reliance, at least, on our technology. This isn't a new thing. Technology is clearly one of the most important forces, especially in modern society. And that's not surprising. Alone among all the things that God created, He gave humans the ability to create tools and to constantly improve on the design of those tools to help us in our lives. This is the basis of all technology. And our communication technology especially has become extraordinarily advanced in the past few decades. And because we're so used to having it and being able to use it so easily, it's easy to put a lot of trust in our technology. But if you live in a place like Payson, where I do, you know that the loss of a single telecom cable can take down virtually all of our advanced communications technology in a second. It takes down cell phones, internet, cable TV, pretty much everything just like that. It's because of that human factor, or in this case, the human-made factor, comes into play with this. That technology, that cable, the things that we have, they are human-made. And so it shouldn't surprise us the Bible tells us not to put our trust in technology. Again, the psalmist says in Psalm 20, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They are brought to their knees and fall, but we rise and stand up firm. O Lord, save the king. Answer us when we call." So if we shouldn't place our trust in our governments, or our science, or our medicine, or even our technology, in what should we trust? Well, a lot of people who've gotten to this point in the who do I trust question have decided that there's really just one person they can trust. Me. Well, not me specifically, but themselves individually. They found that they can only trust themselves. See, when you can't be absolutely sure about anyone or anything, so their thinking goes, you can at least be sure about yourself. So you can place your trust in yourself, right? Well, not so fast. Proverbs 28 tells us that he who trusts in himself is a fool. And maybe the only thing that's dumber than trusting ourselves alone is placing our trust in the hands of others who seem to be just like us as though they were us. See, a big part of the reason that our country is so divided today is because of a way of thinking called tribalism, which is the tendency to identify and associate with people who look like us and share similar ideas to us. If you go far enough back in history, all of our ancestors were part of tribes that organized mostly along ethnic lines. And some of this most basic sort of tribalism still lingers in the form of racial and ethnic biases, even in the most advanced countries. But for the most part, tribalism shows up today in our tendency to seek out people who look like us, not so much because they look like us physically, skin color, height, male, female, that sort of thing, but rather because they look like us in terms of having similar economic status, similar education, similar family backgrounds, similar religious ideals, similar political ideologies. We want to be around people with whom we have a lot in common. And it's easier to do this today than ever before because of the email and the internet. In the past, you sort of had to live with whoever lived near you. Different backgrounds, different ideas and all. You had to accept that because that was who lived there. But today, we can simply go online and find whole communities that share our exact same backgrounds, our same values, our same ideas. Now, this can provide useful emotional support and a sense of belonging, especially to someone who's relatively isolated like we all are right now. But there's also a big danger, because online communities can become very insular, which is to say that they tend to focus exclusively on their own ideas and they tend to shut out anything that differs from what they think. And this can lead to a very circular kind of thinking where very bad ideas are reinforced as they are simply reflected from one person to another within that community. And the result of that for us today is that increasing polarization as each of those communities reinforces its own ideas and doesn't want to listen to any of the other communities. This kind of self-reinforcing thinking can also lead us to think that we can fully place our trust in the other members of our community because they're just like us after all. At its worst, our trust can end up in the hands of a single individual or a small group who we've come to believe has all the right answers because they're saying all the right things. But part of the reason that's happening is because we've shut out all the dissenting voices, and once all of that is in the hands of just one person or a small group, there's all sorts of bad things that can happen. Cults, hate groups, even involvement in terrorist organizations. We've seen these things in recent years becoming more and more common. And as usual, the Bible has been telling us all along just what a stupid idea it is to get involved in this. Again, the psalmist in Psalm 49 says, "This is the fate of those who trust in themselves and of their followers who approve their saying. Like sheep, they are destined for the grave, and death will feed on them. Their forms will decay in the grave, far from their princely mansions. But God will redeem my life from the grave. He will surely take me to himself." So it turns out that we can't even fully put our trust in our own selves. So what's left? Well, if you've been paying attention to the passages we're looking at, you've probably noticed a pretty consistent theme. The one place we can safely place our trusts. Solomon says it best over in Proverbs 3. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." Why do we put our trust fully in the Lord? Well, we've already seen what happens when we trust too much in lesser, mostly human-created things. But in Psalm 33, the psalmist reveals a key reason why we can and should fully trust in God. We wait and hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. May your unfailing love rest upon us, O Lord, even as we put our hope in you. See, the psalmist says that we trust in God because his love for us is unfailing. Now remember that God's love is not a selfish, me-centered love, but rather it's one that seeks our good first and foremost. In other words, what the psalmist is saying is that God has always and will always seek to do what's best for us if we place our hope in him. That's a pretty solid basis for trust, right? Reliability is the core of trust. I mean, think about how many manufacturers try to convince you that their product is reliable because they know you're more likely to buy it. The more we know we can count on someone or something, the more we tend to trust it. David expresses this idea over in Psalm 9, where he says that those who know God trust in him because God has never forsaken those who seek him. Because of this, because of the certainty of God's unfailing love and his commitment to his people, Isaiah says that we can have peace as we trust in God. Isaiah 26 reads, "You will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is steadfast because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord is the rock eternal." God is the rock eternal. He is absolute and steadfast in his love for us, and he always keeps his promises. And that really takes us back to where we started. Who do you trust? And we looked at that parable at the very beginning, the parable of the wise and foolish builders, and Jesus answers the question simply. You trust the rock. Jesus is telling us to trust in God, and by extension, to trust in Jesus' teachings, because he, as the Son, speaks on behalf of God the Father. And he says this explicitly over in John chapter 14. "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me." As Christians, it is vitally important that we place our trust fully in Jesus' hands. See, we know that in times of trouble, they're going to come, because the Bible tells us that, and history definitely agrees with that. Now, some of these troubles are directed specifically at God's people, but most of the time, big trouble affects everyone. The coronavirus pandemic is only the latest example of this, a big trouble on a worldwide scale. But here's where who do you trust really comes into play. Because when trouble starts up, no matter how bad it is, we have peace as God's children. We have security in his embrace. We have confidence because we know that our Father is in control, not just in this life, but much more importantly, he's in control of the life that's to come. On the other hand, when those big troubles start happening, the people of the world don't have anything solid to hold on to. They're like sheep without a shepherd, and they will fall under the weight of disaster. In Luke 21, Jesus tells us that the ultimate expression of this difference in who we trust will be seen at the moment of ultimate trouble when the world itself is coming to an end. Jesus says, "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things happen begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. So the message I want to leave you with today is simple. If you place your full trust in any mortal thing, you are inevitably going to fall. But if you place your trust in the eternal God who loves his children and is always faithful, you will stand. Not just today, not just in the here and now are you going to stand. No, you're going to stand in expectant awe at the moment of Christ's return when everybody else is trying to hide themselves. You're going to stand in confidence before the judgment seat when everyone else is trying to explain away what they did. But best of all, you're going to stand in the glory of the eternal and renewed heaven and earth in the presence of God and Jesus for all of eternity. Isn't that worth your trust? After all, God has already trusted you by giving you the gospel and making you one of its ambassadors. And if he's willing to trust us with all our weaknesses and failings, surely we can trust him in his perfection. So be sure to let the world see that you trust fully in God. Be sure to let them know how he's rewarded your trust and be a witness for Christ in that way. May the Lord bless you this week, and may he bless the world through you.